Привет.
Hello.
Servus.
Marhaba.
Hola.
Hello.
I'm inspired that there's so many people working to accomplish the same goal of creating a connected future.
By having students lead clubs on campus directly supported by Google developers, that's the best way to reach out to students.
It's really inspirational always to hear about members of the community who echo your values and echo your beliefs.
I've been listening more than I've been speaking, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing because I'm just getting all these ideas.
Google, it needs to reach a wider audience and be more relatable as a company, and I think Google is one of the brands that is very good at doing that.
Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to the second episode of our Legal Insights for Student Entrepreneurs. My name is Jong Hoon Park. I am a third-year applied math and economics major at York University in Toronto, Canada, and I'm also the club lead for the DSC at Chapter York University. If you were here at our first episode back in September, I would like to welcome you back, and I would like to thank you for attending our event again. But if you're new here, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of our team here at DSC York University. So for all the people who are new here, I'll describe what our series is all about. So in our Legal Insights series, we'll be hosting our fellow Osgoode Hall Law School graduate and technology business lawyer, Suresh Suskandaraja, to share with you some legal insights for upcoming student entrepreneurs who have innovative ideas in order to bridge the gap between the world of technology and the world of law. And as always, this presentation will be recorded, so please don't worry if you miss anything that interested you. So you can always go back to our channel and then check out our recording of this presentation. Also, please feel free to drop any questions you might have in the chat. We'll try to answer them as we go. We see all of your comments in the chat, no matter where you're joining us, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, or on YouTube. So please feel free to join us and ask any questions that you might have in the chat. But if you have any questions after the presentation has ended, you can always drop your questions in our Discord channel. That should be popping up on the screen right now. And without further ado, let's all welcome our guest speaker to the main stage, Suresh. How are you, Suresh?
Good, John. How are you doing? Thank you for having me.
Good, thank you very much. Welcome back to our event.
Thank you. I look forward to
it. We can't wait to hear what you have to say this time. So for people who weren't here in our first episode, would you please describe yourself and your experience?
Yeah, so as you did a great job at introducing me, I started off as an engineer, then went into the world of entrepreneurship, did my MBA, then eventually went into law. But my passion is still technology and entrepreneurship, so that's why I started my law practice, Suresh Law, and we focus primarily on helping entrepreneurs succeed by providing the legal assistance that they need. So myself, I've been an entrepreneur multiple times, starting technology ventures and also leading technology companies to exit. So I had the practical experience and also the academic experience of having done 4 degrees, but now I'm trying to bridge the gaps and put it all together and help other fellow entrepreneurs succeed.
I see.
That's what I'm doing. Yeah.
Awesome. Technology and law, those are 2 very different fields. Would you mind sharing with us what motivated you to jump from technology to law?
I think it's a natural progression. Like I started from a young age. I was passionate about technology, so I went into engineering. I worked in technology companies. But when you're working in technology and doing startups, you realize that it's a multi-dimensional approach that's needed to succeed. So the business side of it, the people side of it, the project management side of it interested me a lot. So that's why I pivoted from just doing coding and development work to doing the business side of things. And then from there, I pivoted to do the legal aspect. So because everything is multidimensional and I just wanted to cover different dimensions, and now I'm trying to put it all together and trying to solve problems this way.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. So, for the people who weren't here for the first episode of our Legal Insight series was actually about discussing things about founders agreements, IP agreements, and NDAs. Would you mind telling us what students can take away from this? This is our second episode.
Yeah, for sure. So the first one, as you mentioned, was about the ideas, the early stage of the ideas, and how to protect the ideas. Now, this one is about getting started. So it's about setting up your business and organizing the business. So that's what we're going to focus here. Then in a couple of weeks, we'll be focusing about how do you grow your business. So today's topic is about incorporation and organizing documents. As I mentioned, I'm a licensed lawyer in Ontario, in Canada. So most of the work that I do is in Ontario. But what I'm presenting here, I'm trying to keep it very general at a high level so that it could be applicable to different jurisdictions. But obviously, you would seek a lawyer if you want to go further in your own jurisdiction. And whatever I'm sharing here is more legal insights and legal information and not meant to be legal advice, because you would contact me and I'll be happy to find out more details to help you if you need any legal advice.
Awesome, thank you. So we have a lot of people joining in from the States today. As you're a lawyer located in Canada, are these legal insights and advices that you'll be sharing today relevant to the people, students in the United States?
Yes, for sure, and that's why I'm trying to keep the topics very at a high level, so that the topics, the setup, the arrangements are very similar in the United States as well, and in other parts of the world as well.
Awesome, that's very useful. All right, Suresh, we can't wait to hear what you have to say. Whenever you're ready, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, John. So this is the second episode, and I do have some slides, so I'll be going through the slides. But as John mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt by asking your questions in the chat, and I'll be able to address it, because the more we engage through the conversation, it'll be more interesting. So feel free to ask any question you have. Okay. So today's topic, as I mentioned, is about incorporating or registering your company and organizing your company. The first part is registering the company, and then we need to organize all the records. So a bit of an agenda to get started. So the first part of what we'll be talking about is the name search. How do you come up with the right name for your business? And then once you have the right name, how do you incorporate or register your company? And then once you have done that, the minute book is a set of documents that would be about maintaining the records about your company. And so it's three parts that we'll be discussing. These are the three parts. Okay, and looks like we already have a question. Are we practicing? So what are some effective ways to attract new clients? Most difficult aspect of taking a startup public. So, these are in terms of if you're practicing, in terms of practicing solo, in the law practice, I have the same experience in terms of, starting on my own and then building it up slowly. So the same way in any business, any technology business when you're starting on your own, there's a lot of challenges in terms of you have to juggle the legal work, the marketing work, and the technology work. And that's why these sessions are important for you to get educated, so you're aware of some of the legal implications of things, so that you can have the right experts or the right assistance when you need it. And you can learn this over an hour, sorry. So the first part is the name search, as I was saying. So in Ontario and in Canada, what we do is we do name search to come up to find the right suitable name for your business. So when you're trying to come up with the name, you'll start off doing Google searches to see what other names are available or what domain names are available. So that would be the first step you'll take when you come up with when you're brainstorming name ideas for your business. And then once you have done that, and you can see that domain names are available and nobody else in your area is using it from just Google searches, you'll pick up about 3 different names. And you'll go, usually a lot of this work can be also done online by yourself, or you can get a lawyer. It all depends on your comfort zone. If you want to have an expert guide you through through the process, then a lawyer could guide you. But if you're comfortable doing things on your own, then you can do that as well. You have that option. But it's just like going to a doctor. A lot of times you can self-diagnose, or you can go to a doctor to get the expert to help you do things the right way. So I always recommend going to a lawyer, especially when you're starting up a business, because it's not just the registration process, but it's the whole journey, the planning. What else should you be aware of? And getting that advice and guidance is something very important to have. So I always recommend going to a lawyer. So when we're doing the name searches, once you have those 3 names, you can do a pre-search to see if these names are available, because every time you do these searches, you're paying as well. And name search, when you're doing an incorporation in Canada, you're spending about $700 to $1,000. So about $1,000, let's say, to get set up. This is including doing the name search, incorporating, and then organizing your documents as well.
Suresh, thank you for that. There's a question in the chat. The question is, what is the average amount used in a registering company in Canada?
Yep, I just saw that and I answered. So basically, it's about in Canada, it's about $1,000 on average. So that includes doing the name search and doing the incorporations and organizing documents. But what you should keep in mind is that a bulk of that money, so about $400 or so, goes to the government for the filing. So the lawyers would draft up all the documents, but when we file, there's a filing fee of approximately $400 that's going for that. So the rest is legal fees and the time that the lawyers are spending to organize the company. And pretty much all the documents that we'll be talking about today is part of that. So it's quite a bit of work that goes into it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Suresh.
You're welcome. So going back to name search, so once you have the 3 names, you do the pre-search because that's cheaper to do. And once you've narrowed down, you do an official search, and that's called nuance search. And once you do the nuance search, what's actually happening is you pick a name, and the name has to have the extension Inc. or Corp. Or Limited in Canada, for example. And then you're doing a search across the whole country to see what other corporation names exist or that is the same or similar, and also what trade names and trademarks are registered under those names. So corporations are businesses that are registered, incorporations. Trade names are one, like a numbered corporation or another corporation can have a trade name that's registered, where it's like a secondary name that they're using, that they're operating under. So these names also, this database also gets searched. And trademarks are something different, and then trademark registrations are also, registered trademarks are being searched as well. So that's kind of nice. So even if you're trying to incorporate, you're searching across a broad database to do all of this before incorporating. And when you do that nuance search, that name that you search is reserved for 60 days. So after you review the results, you have 60 days to use that reservation number and proceed to do the incorporation filing. So now is what information do you need to get started? So first of all, you need to know what name you're going to use and what extension. So the Inc., Limited, or Corp. These are personal preference. There's no real significant difference between them. It's just which one you're more comfortable using and what's popular in the type of industry you're in. Majority of the tech companies, they seem to be using Inc., for example, but it's a personal preference. And then you would need to know what's the nature of your business, because when you're doing the name search, we need to mention what is the nature of the business you're planning to operate. Then some keywords in terms of, how did you come up with this name? Is it a coined word, for example? And the second part is any consents and other information. For example, if we already had this name used in a name registration of a different kind, then you're giving consent to use it again. So you may be the rightful owner of this name through a previous registration, and you can give consent to use it again in a new incorporation. So that's what the consent part is, to avoid being rejected, the application being rejected. Okay, so from there, once we had the name search done, we go on to do the incorporation. So this is, the majority of the work goes here. So after you complete the incorporation, actually, even when we're filing it, we're preparing an articles of incorporation. That is the document. So when you submit it and it gets approved, this is like your birth certificate. So the article or your passport. So your articles of incorporation is the document that you would take whenever you're trying to open up a bank account or anywhere, taking a loan or anything. People are going to be asking for the articles of incorporation. So the information, we need to look at what information you need to have ready when you're going to the incorporation stage. And then in Canada, you want to think about whether you want to incorporate provincially or federally, because you have both options. Right now in Ontario, for example, the provincial registration, the rules have changed and it's very popular. It's popular since the rules have changed in terms of allowing foreign investors to come in. So before there was a 25% of the directors had to be Canadian residents. Now, as of July, that rule has changed so that foreigners can also incorporate in Ontario. So I've been very busy in helping entrepreneurs from all over the world to get the business set up here. Before I proceed any further, is there any questions to get before I go further, John?
Yes, Suresh. So there's another question in chat from Osmond. Is it possible for someone to register a company if they're not sure what their final nature of their business or service or product would be?
Yeah, so good question. So when you're doing the name cert, it asks you what's the nature of the business, but you don't need to be specific. You can keep it broad as possible, information technology, manufacturing, and so on. So you can keep it as broad as you want. But this is really, I'll tell you why this is important. So when you do the name search and there's another similar name, where I see, so when you see that similar name, you want to then go to see what industry they're in. So if you're trying to start a technology company and there's a similar name in the restaurant industry, that's probably okay, even if it's in the same jurisdiction. Versus if both are in the technology sector, it's an issue. So it's really to see what sector you're in and not to really go narrow into what exactly your business is going to be doing. Okay, so you make sure to mention whether it's going to be a restaurant or a technology company, essentially.
Awesome. Thank you, Suresh.
You're welcome. Any other questions right now?
That's it for now. I think you can go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So the third thing we need to do is what clauses to include and what are the different share classes that we want to have when we're going to incorporate. And this is again a reason why you want to talk to a lawyer, because your needs today may be different from your needs down the line. So it's good to plan out how you want to structure your corporation, because once you file, then every time you want to make any significant changes to this, you have to file again and there'll be costs associated. So you can save yourself some hassle down the line by planning ahead and getting the right advice and structuring your company properly when you're doing the incorporation the first time around. So to get started with the incorporation, here's the information that you need. As I mentioned, when we did the name search, you get a nuanced names reservation number. So that number is what we use to do to start the incorporation, to pull up your file and to show that it's been within 60 days, and you can proceed. So if you don't do an official name search, you cannot proceed to do an incorporation filing. So it's mandatory. And then you need to have a business address. So if you're doing an Ontario register incorporation, you need to have an address within Ontario. If you're doing a federal one, you still need to pick a province to have a business address in. The number of directors, you can set the limit of, if you want, you can put a fixed number, or you can put a range of minimum and maximum number of directors you want to have in the corporation. Then the names of the directors and their contact information would be needed. And these are the starting directors. You can always add more directors later or remove directors, but when you're incorporating, who will be the directors is what you need to put in here. The last one is the incorporators or filers. So this could be the lawyer filing on your behalf or somebody else filing on your behalf or yourself. So that would be the incorporator. And then we'll look into some clauses to put. Is there any restrictions you want to put on the business in terms of limiting yourself, limiting the powers of the corporation? For example, I have a corporation register, which is Suresh Law Professional Corporation, and I'm restricted to practice law in that corporation. I cannot go on to manage any other business through that. So it's a restricted professional corporation. And then the classes and maximum number of shares that the corporation is authorized to issue. So you can create different classes of shares. This could have like voting rights and non-voting rights and preferred shares. So there's different type of shares you can share classes you can create. And it's good to think about that and plan it and create the right classes when you're doing the corporation. But you can also, and then the maximum number of shares for each type of shares, each class should also be defined now. But but later on, you can go ahead and issue any number of shares up to that maximum. But right now, you're only setting what are the different classes and what is the maximum number of shares for each class. But the issuance of shares can happen at any time after you incorporate. Any questions there? Okay. So the other thing is, just keep on going in terms of clauses to add. What are the rights, privileges, and restrictions and conditions?
Sorry to interrupt you, Suraj. We have a question from Carl Donna. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. It says, if the directors are in different countries that are very far away from each other, like Canada and India, that might have different startup laws. Is there anything that they should be aware of?
Yeah, so I do incorporations all the time where the directors are located in different parts of the world. Because a lot of the entrepreneurs that I help are trying to immigrate to Canada through the startup visa program. So I do this all the time. And, what you just have to be mindful is, you're incorporating in Canada, if you're in this case, so you've got to be aware of the laws that applies to Canada. And that's even though the directors are located elsewhere, there could be tax implications in terms of whether the company is a Canadian controlled corporation or not. So, but that you will talk to an accountant to see what will be the tax implication. But from a legal entity registration and having directors located in different parts of the world, you're just focusing on what is the requirement. And right now, Ontario has relaxed its rules to allow directors to be anywhere essentially. But in the past, the rule was that 25% or more of the directors had to be Canadian residents. So that rule still applies if you're trying to incorporate a federal corporation in Canada. But if you're doing a provincial one in Ontario, for example, and a couple of other provinces also have the same rule, then that rule is no longer applicable. I hope that answered your question. If I didn't, please post it again and I'll be happy to follow up more. Okay, so as I was saying, the different classes, what are the rights and privileges? And then moving on to the next one, is there any restrictions on transferring or issuing shares? And you can state that if you have any, but you don't necessarily need to. And the same way, there's another thing is if there's any other provisions that you want to include. So lawyers could help you figure out if there's anything that's specific to your business needs that you want to put as a provision, and you can do that when you're incorporating. So, just before I get into this, why is all this important? Like, the legal aspect of a lot of people sometimes think that just incorporating, you can just click a few buttons and you have incorporated, registered a company. So it's simple. But it's important to understand the legal implications behind doing everything. Just like, when we create an email address or anything we do, there's implications. So when you're creating a corporation, you're creating a new legal entity. And once it's created, it actually takes time and it's hard to even shut it down, to dissolve it. So you have responsibilities when you create a corporation. So it's important to know the rules, and you can't say that you're not aware, because there are terms and conditions that you're agreeing to. So it's important to take the time to understand what are your responsibilities when you're creating a corporation, so that you don't break any rules, and you can also understand what rights you have as well, and how the corporation can be changed later and what needs to be done later on as well. So just to give you a broad overview of this whole process. So the terms and conditions, some key ones that I highlighted here. You have to do a nuanced name search, which is mandatory. And this name search and any documents you're creating here needs to be kept in the corporate records. So wherever the business address is, you need to maintain records of the name search you did, the incorporation you filed. You don't necessarily. So now we're transitioning to a phase where we don't necessarily need to have printed and original signed documents, but digital signatures are fine. But at least it should be kept in an electronic format in the same business address location as well. So you just need to maintain records. That's the requirement. Then all the first directors named in the articles of incorporation must sign a consent, that they are agreeing to be directors of the corporation. That's obvious, but it's something important because you can't just add a director without their consent because it's a lot of responsibility. A corporation is a separate legal entity, so it files its own taxes every year. You're required to file taxes even if you have no income, but at the same time, the liability is limited because the separate entity. So if there's any lawsuits and things like that, for the most part, the corporation shields, handles that, so the directors are shielded. But for things like tax obligations and so on, the directors could get involved. So that's why it's important that you have the consent when you add them as directors, and you maintain the records where you receive the consent for them to be included as directors. Okay, if there's any questions, I'll take that now.
Hi, Suresh. So there's a question in chat, and they're asking, let's assume that you don't have an actual business address or like an office address. Would it be acceptable to list a home address instead?
Yeah, great question, and that is completely acceptable. You can use a lot of people use their home address as a business address. It's just a matter of privacy. Like if you're okay with with using your home address, then you can do that. And then sometimes lawyers like myself, so I offer the service where we provide business address as well, so that if you want to use our address for your incorporation, we can do that as well, like a mail service essentially. But you can use your home address. You just cannot use a PO box. That's the only thing in Ontario. You cannot go to the post office and open a PO box. But as long as it's a home or an actual business address, it's fine.
I see. I guess a good example would be Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs starting up Apple in their own garage, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if they could do it, we could do it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Suresh.
You're welcome. And then, so just going on, what do you do if you're trying to register a similar name? Let me take a minute to explain that. So maybe I may have touched on it when I did the name search. So when you're registering a similar name, you need to make sure that it's in a different industry they're in or in a different jurisdiction. So this is where it gets tricky, because sometimes when people do it on their own, they think that it's acceptable because the name is spelled differently, or the name has multiple words, have solutions. The name that exists has the word solutions, and I'm trying to incorporate a name without the word solution in there, but the first part is similar. So it could be tricky where the test is could a reasonable person, like an average person, be confused between the two names, and that's what the test is. So you want to make sure that you get advice from an expert to guide you before you proceed to register a name if there is a similar name that already exists, and you want to document that. So if you have a similar name, you get the expert opinion, legal opinion from a lawyer, and you keep that in your record before you register. and that's the requirement as well. So even if you're doing things on your own, if you find a similar name, I would suggest you go to a lawyer to get that legal opinion before you proceed. And the last but not least, the responsibility for the information that you're submitting to be filed to be correct and complete, it lies with the incorporator, whoever is filing it, or the lawyer. So so it's very important that you pay attention to everything that you're doing in this whole process, because it's your responsibility. If there's a mistake, or if you may face lawsuits and so on if you do anything wrong, right? So just make sure that you understand what you're doing, and and everything is correct and complete. Okay, before I go on to organizing documents, is there any questions about the incorporation part? Let me just stay here for a moment.
We'll take a little bit of, we'll wait about 30 seconds and before for other questions to pop up. If you have any questions, please go ahead.
So we did the name search part, then the second part is the incorporation. And I provided a lot of information on why it's important to get the legal expert to help you when you have similar names that are registered as well. Because I have plenty of stories, like where even this week or today I'm dealing with somebody who registered a company that had a similar name, and now I had to advise them that that's going to cause problems. So you want to make sure that you don't spend too much time to start it's a new brand name you're creating essentially. So you don't want to invest money and time and get the brand out there and having to shut it down later when the other party may send you a letter to stop using their name, right? So I'm always having to get involved in advising clients sometimes when they do it on their own and register a name that's similar. So you want to avoid spending that money later on.
Suresh, there's a question in the chat. Is it possible to register more than one name in the same way that we do with websites?
Can we register more than one name in the same way we do with the website? Yeah, good question. So the corporation name is only one corporation name, okay? But as I was saying earlier, so you can have a corporation name, and then you can add other trade names on top of it in addition to that, okay? And this could be related or could be completely different as well. But the corporation name will have the ending of Inc., Corp, or Limited. The trade names you add will not have those endings. So you only have one corporation set up, but you will have other operating names. So these are called operating names. So you can be, you can have one name and then have other additional operating businesses under the business names under the same company.
And the question specified, would it be any different if the entrepreneur, for example, bought a .com and a .net at the same time?
I mean, okay, so if you buy a .com and a .net at the same time for your business name, it shouldn't matter unless the business name contains the .com in it, right? So if it contains in it, then if you're adding another trade name, then you can put the .net in there. So it would be similar. Yeah, you can do it. Yeah, exactly. It's like similar to that, and you're adding as additional trade names, but it will cost you extra for doing that, but not too much more.
So as long as it's within your business practice, as long as it's in your interest, there's no issue.
Exactly, and even from your tax obligation, you'll talk to an accountant, but it's still one entity that you're filing a tax, and it's one entity that you're opening the bank account. But you'll probably want to report that you have additional trading names or operating names to your bank, so that if you can get issue checks or receive payments under those trading names. But the legal entity remains one.
I see. Thank you very much, Suresh. I hope that answered the question.
Okay. Any other questions around incorporations before we proceed further?
We'll wait 10 more seconds for the questions to pop up.
Again, we're talking about, okay, good. Again, we're talking about incorporations here. So the corporations are, so if you're thinking of partnerships and so on, that's not a corporation. This is, a separate legal entity, whereas a partnership is not, it's more of a partnership agreement, but it doesn't become a separate legal entity. So today's talk is focused on the incorporation and also organizing that corporation. Okay, so I'll move right into the third part of today's workshop. So organizing documents. So organizing documents are often referred to as minute book. That's the minute book is essentially maintaining your corporate record. So what's interesting, which a lot of people don't realize, is when you incorporate at the end, you get the articles of incorporation, right? Also, let me backtrack a little bit. So when you submit a name search, it takes about a day or two to get the results. And then when you prepare the incorporation documents, and when you submit it, again, it takes a day or two to get approved or rejected. If it's rejected, you'll get the reasons, and you can try to explain it to get the outcome changed. But otherwise, if everything's successful, you get the final articles of incorporation that you can take to the banks and so on to open up the bank account. Now, anything that's in the articles of incorporation is if you're trying to make changes to that, so that's the directors, adding or removing the directors, changing the business address, or adding the class, like the different classes of shares, you would need to do amendments and file those amendments with the government. So there's a filing fee involved for that. This third part we're talking about is maintaining the corporate record. These don't get filed with the government. These get maintained by the corporation at the business address. And a lot of people think that, like, for example, your share information gets registered with the government, but it doesn't. It gets maintained in the corporate record. But so that's another reason why there's a big responsibility on the directors to maintain these records, and you could get audited for that. So it's important to do things the right way. A lot of people think that they can just incorporate a business and they don't need to do anything else. Everything that we're discussing here is mandatory. You do have to do this in Ontario and in Canada, for example. So we're going to talk about the bylaws. We're going to talk about the share registers and the different resolutions, and how do you make changes to the corporation. And all of this is part of the minute book. So as I was mentioning, why is this important? Because it's the law to comply with the legal obligations. And also, if you have an accountant for your business and the accountants have a duty to audit the business, then they will want to review your corporate records. The corporate records could be, the minute book can be maintained by your lawyer, it could be maintained by you, and sometimes the accountants also do maintain this for you. But regardless of who's doing the maintenance, you're required to have all these records. The other one is bankers. If you're trying to get a loan from the bank, or you're trying to raise capital for your business, everybody will pretty much want to see if you've maintained all the corporate records properly, and who owns what shares and who are the directors. Pretty much the history of the company is what everybody will be interested in. So you are required to maintain for this purpose as well. And if you're trying to exit the company, or you're trying to issue shares in a significant, you're selling shares in a significant way, the prospective buyers will want to see the company documents, the corporate records as well. So that's another reason why it makes sense to maintain these. And the other reason is if there's any issues and you go into litigation, you're for sure going to be required to bring and produce all the corporate records. So if you have not been having good practice of maintaining the records properly and allowing an expert like a lawyer to help you with that, you may run into some serious problem later on, because it may be difficult to recreate these records. So it's a better practice to be maintaining and following the rules right throughout, even after you incorporate your business. So this is something a lot of people don't realize. I hope you got that clearly here. Any questions about this?
Yes, Suresh. So there's another question. This is regarding the sharing corporate records. This person's asking what the procedure is with sharing corporate records if my startup gets bought out by a larger company.
Good question. Um, so, as I was discussing in our last episode, before you share anything, you'll most likely be doing an NDA, non-disclosure agreement, a confidentiality agreement, to make sure that they're not going to get exposed to all this information about you, all the details about you, and expose that in any wrong way. So you'll be doing that probably as a first step. And then you also want to be careful about what information, to what extent you want to share. Like, for example, they don't need to ask you for meeting minutes, but they could ask for financials. They could ask you for the corporate records in terms of who the directors were, who the shareholders are, and the history of the shareholders in terms of who bought and sold shares. All of those they can see, but they don't necessarily the different resolutions that were passed, but they don't need to see meeting minutes. So there are some documents you're required to produce to different parties and some you're not. So it's important to know that as well. But in general, you probably want to have a practice of getting parties to sign an NDA before you disclose, before you share your minute book.
I see. Thank you very much, Suresh.
You're welcome. Whereas if somebody, you're getting a loan from is asking for your articles of incorporation, that may be a different story, right? You may not need to sign an NDA for that. And by the way, articles of incorporation plus any articles of amendment, because sometimes you create the corporation and you may make changes. And when somebody asks for the articles of incorporation, if there has been any amendments made, you want to pretty much package that together and provide it as well.
All right. I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much, Suresh.
You're welcome. So the first part, the bylaw. So when we talk about the bylaw, this is the general conduct of the business. What will be the rules for the business? How will it operate? And this document stays at a very high level. It stays very broad. It doesn't go into too much details, other than mentioning how different things will work at a high level. Then there's another document called shareholders agreement that usually has more details in terms of any agreements. But this is the general rules of how to conduct a business. So the first part would be, is a corporate seal. You don't necessarily need to have it, but is a corporate seal for the company. When will be the financial year end for when is the year end for the company? And that you need to have that for tax purposes. So you can define that in the bylaw or say that you need to have a financial year end. And then how will the execution of documents and other things happen? And how will banking matters happen, in terms of having the authority to delegate the power to somebody else to do banking and so on. All of this, all of these things will get stipulated in the bylaw. And then borrowing power and delegation of that. So how could the corporation borrow money from banks or for other investors? And how could that power be delegated? So you want to talk about those rules in the bylaw as well. What will be the director's duty? How will they be compensated? And what kind of expenses could they claim? All of those at a high level would be described in the bylaw as well. How will the meetings of directors take place? And how will the appointment of officers and their powers and duties will be? So there's a difference between directors, officers, and shareholders. Directors are pretty much what you need are the people who are kind of the board of directors who are at the beginning when the company is being created or they're involved in the key decision making. And then officers are involved in the day-to-day management of the business. So the directors are more the strategy, officers are more the day-to-day operations, and the directors give the authority, give the power to the officers they appoint the officers essentially. Shareholders they own a share or stake in the company. So you can have a corporation or you can have individuals as shareholders. But for directors and officers, it has to be individuals. And the limitation of liability, as a corporation, how will that work in terms of limiting the liability? You want to describe that in the bylaw. And how will the meetings of the shareholders take place? So you want to talk about that. So this document is something that you're required to have as well. Next, is there any question before I go?
We'll wait for some more questions to pop up if there are any questions. Oh, Suresh, there's one more question. It says, let's say that I'm sued for a copyrighted idea or a material that I did not know at the time I created my company. What's my best option to minimize potential losses?
Okay, so we're talking about getting sued for a copyrighted idea or material at the time you created the company. What's the best way to minimize the option? So here today we're talking about incorporation and organizing the business. So, the main thing that would be relevant here is if you use like a copyrighted name or something like that, a trademark in your business name that you're not permitted to use. And the best way to minimize that potential loss is by having an expert as a lawyer, for example, to guide you through the registration, because it asks you, like in the keyword section, it asks you, it asks you essentially what type of, how did you come up with the name? So you would disclose it there. But this is a very specific question as well. That's not completely related to the incorporation process. So you can contact me and I'll be happy to answer this question later on through Discord, for example. Okay, so after the event, I'll be on Discord and you can send any questions like this as well.
I see. Thank you, Suresh. I have a personal question for you, Suresh, if you don't mind. So you mentioned that at the beginning of our presentation that these topics that you're about to cover are high level in terms of law. My question is, at what areas do you see companies out there tend to dive deeper into?
So
well, in particular in bylaws.
Yeah. So in terms of high level, what I mentioned is what are the different documents you need to have, and the bylaw is pretty much a high level document also that talks about the different type of things that we want the company should be looking at and what would be the high level rules. So it's still not very granular, but from there the bylaws usually say there may be the articles of incorporations and the organizing documents, including the bylaws, are at the top, and then on the bylaws would say will open up the room for other documents to be created in the future. For example, a shareholders agreement. So it would say, these are the general rules, but we do have the option to have a shareholders agreement where further details can be described. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Suresh.
You're welcome. All right. So next one is also keeping in mind that we got 10 minutes left. I'll try to speed up a little bit, but we're almost there. So the share register. So share register is essentially keeping track of the shares in the company. And that's very important because this doesn't get filed with the government. So the corporate records need to maintain all the shareholders' information. What are the shares that were issued? Who were the individuals or the corporation? So the shareholders ledger keeps track of all of that. And any subscription for new shares, or if there's any transfers or sale of shares, all of that needs to be in the share register, and it needs to be carefully documented and carefully updated and maintained. And shareholders agreement is something else. That is a document that talks about the duties and rights of the shareholders. And this is a very important document that we'll be talking about in the next session, not today, but it's an important document that if it exists, it will be part of the share register as well. Okay, so share register, that's what it is, very important and it's mandatory to have. Now moving to resolutions. So resolutions are like important meetings and decisions you're taking. So when the company is first formed, you need to have a first director resolution that, and during that, the director is pretty much consenting to be a director and that they meet all the requirements such as mental capacity, the age requirements, and so on. And the same way, there's a first shareholders resolution that talks about appointing a director and having bank accounts and things like that. And then a director's consent is essentially the same thing where you're agreeing to be the director. And the resolutions of directors and shareholders and meeting minutes all are different requirements. So you need to have annual meetings, or you can pass these resolutions instead of having a meeting, but you need to maintain records of that. Then the last part, as I mentioned before, is if you're trying to make any changes. So if you're trying to make any changes to the articles of incorporation, that will be an article of amendment that would be needed. So if you have a business address change or director change or the name of the business or the class of shares, everything else gets maintained in your corporate records, and you'll pass resolutions for those changes to take place, and you'll maintain it in your corporate records. So that's pretty much it for today's topic. I just want to take any questions.
If there are any questions in the chat, we'll take them right now.
We did have lots of good questions so far. So thank you for sharing those questions, everyone. And I encourage you to ask any last minute questions you may have. But if you don't have any questions now, you could always message me on Discord. And also you can reach out to me on other networks like LinkedIn and so on. My website is suresh.law, and I'm on LinkedIn and other social media networks, and you can find me there as well.
Suresh, there's a question in the chat saying that they're thinking of adding an international employee by giving them some equity. Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea?
Again, this is a specific question that you can ask me directly later on, and I'll be happy to talk about, giving, because that could be like legal advice. But what I can mention here is that, you could give equity in terms to anybody, whether it's employee or non-employee, to anyone or any entity, any businesses around the world. So that is possible. You can issue that, whether shares or stock options, which are different, which I'll talk about next session.
Thank you, Suresh. I hope that answered the
You're
question.
welcome. Any other questions?
There's another question from Osmond. This one's to you directly, Suresh. Is it possible to get a discount from you incorporating a company here in Canada?
So, the fee, of course, you contact me, and based on your needs, I'm always flexible. My practice, I'm passionate about what I do, and that's why I'm open and transparent about about my services. And this is my website on the screen, suresh.law, and you can book a consultation on there, and I'll be happy to find out more about what you're trying to do and help you with that process. I always, I share a lot of information and help you understand the process in addition to doing the work. So there's a great value you get. And I'm open and transparent about the pricing in terms of trying to get flat rate fixing for a lot of the work. So incorporation is flat fee based, so you understand exactly what you need to pay, and there's no surprises.
Awesome, thank you, Suresh. There's another question. In a corporation, if there are more than 4 people in the company, what is the process to get even rights for everyone?
So if you have more than 4 people in the company, in terms of the rights, shareholders, they could be more than 4 shareholders, but you could create a shareholders agreement that talks about what are the rights, and whether it's even, I don't know whether you're talking about equal rights or you're talking about equal stake in the company. So that's just a matter of the percentage of the shares you own. But in terms of, and also the type of shares that you own, some could have voting, some could have non-voting. So there's differences there, but all of those could be in the shareholders agreement, and you can address that there. Okay.
Thank you, Suresh.
Good question.
Did any of it? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Suresh.
No, I said.
Oh, did you just say good question? Oh, thank you. If there are any other questions, please go ahead and ask. Suresh has one more question. The question says, how can a beginner entrepreneur find affordable legal advice? Would hiring a law student on my campus be okay? What would I have to do to not pay them?
So, good question. Beginner entrepreneur find affordable legal advice. So law students are not allowed to provide legal advice. So you need to be a licensed lawyer to provide legal advice. So that's the first thing. But one thing to keep in mind is that law schools, for example, would have different legal clinics where they may have a lawyer to supervise law students and do work. So I was part of similar IP clinic at Osgood Hall. So you can reach out to law schools that are close to you to see if they have any business legal clinics that provide any services that could be affordable as well. But and then there's the incubators, business incubators also have legal resources, and some law firms also have resources that could be affordable. In my case, through my I provide these types of workshops and others. I share a lot of videos on LinkedIn almost on a weekly basis to share the knowledge. So there's a lot of things like that you can watch and follow to learn on your own, so that you don't have to spend as much money to get the legal advice, where you can learn on your own and then ask specific questions to save you the time and money.
So thank you very much, Suresh.
You're welcome.
If there are any other questions in the chat, please go ahead.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, yeah. So, thank you for everybody who joined us today. And I look forward to meeting everybody on the next session. That's on October 21st. And the next session will be on growing your business. So once you have created and maintained the business, how do you grow it? What are the different agreements? How do you deal with the vendors? How do you deal with the employees? How do you deal with shareholders agreements? How do you raise capital? So all these different type of agreements as you grow your business is what we're going to focus on during the third and last part of this legal insights for student entrepreneurs.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Suresh. And we hope to see you next time on October 21st. All right, that was it, everyone. Thank you Thank you to everyone who joined in today, and to all those people who will be watching the recording if there are any. So mark your calendars for October 21st at 7 o'clock for our third and final episode of our Legal Insight series. And make sure to join us on Discord. That should on the link that should be popping up right now. And we hope to see you on October 21st for the final episode. Thank you very much, everyone. And special thank you to Suresh for joining us.
Thank you, John. And thank you, everyone, for joining. And please share this session because the video will be live on YouTube and so on. So feel free to share with your friends so that they can learn the same knowledge as well.
Thank you, everyone. We hope to see you next.
Привет. Hello. Servus.
Marhaba.
Hola. Hello.
I'm inspired that there's so many people working to accomplish the same goal of creating a connected future.
By having students lead clubs on campus directly supported by Google developers, that's the best way to reach out to students.
It's really inspirational always to hear about members of the community who echo your values and echo your beliefs.
I've been listening more than I've been speaking, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because I'm just getting all these ideas.
Google, it needs to reach a wider audience and be more relatable as a company, and I think Google is one of the brands that is very good at doing that.